Be talking about the positive side, not the negative side. And Dr. Strange has a lot of information on intelligence from outer space that are benevolent. And we're going to hear his story, which is his meeting with the individual in the late 50s, and that he is in contact with right to this present day. But I don't want to steal his show here, so without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Frank Stranges to the podium here, and you will be surprised with what we hear.
That you're able to come to this meeting tonight. I've prepared some information that I believe that many of you will appreciate. And because you took the time and effort to come to this meeting tonight, I would like to give you a gift. Is that all right with everybody? I'm going to do it anyhow. On the table in front of me, there's a poster of a craft that's called Victor 1 that's now parked at Lake Mead in Nevada. And I'll be telling you more about that as we go along this evening. How many of you would like to have a copy of that? Okay, would you pass these out, please? Yes. That's my gift to you tonight. The ship is 300 feet in diameter. Over the years, many people have pondered over the question as to the direct origin of UFOs. And tonight we're going to break this down into 8 sections as to possible origins of unidentified flying objects. First of all, we're going to look at the question of figments of the imagination. There are those who do not believe people see anything. All they're doing is imagining what they're actually seeing. They don't know what they're seeing, and they're making up a bunch of stories. Well, the truth of the matter is, many people inside the intelligence community of the United States and other countries of the world have all pondered over the question of figments of the imagination. Now, out in Los Angeles, they see UFOs every day on the hour. Now, I don't know about them at all, but the good thing about it is there are those who have been tested by qualified investigators as to what they have seen. And it's certainly come down the wire that they are certainly not having figments of the imagination. So the percentage of people who have figments of the imagination is quite large compared to the other 8 points that we're going to be discussing tonight. The second possible origin of unidentified flying objects is the United States government or the United States Air Force or the United States intelligence community that have concocted vehicles that are shaped like saucers, and some of them are oblong while others are round like a ball, others are triangular, others rectangular. But you see, the ones that have been invented by mankind on this planet, whether it be the United States or any other country, have not violated every law of aerodynamics. They don't come and go as a flash of lightning that's even mentioned in the Bible. Does anyone have any objection tonight if I give you a few cites from the Bible? Is there any objection to that? I had 2 people walk out of my meeting in Ottawa just last week because I mentioned the Bible. Can you imagine that? What a great sin I committed. Nevertheless, those that are coming from the United States have been worked upon, they've been manipulated for so many years, but they do not achieve the speeds, nor the velocity, nor the right angle turns, violating every known law of aerodynamics. Now, my interest in UFOs started way back in 1945. How many of you were not alive in 1945? Boy, you're making me feel old tonight. Nevertheless, I was a student at Eastern Bible College in Pennsylvania, and my roommate, who was United States Marine pilot, claimed that he was flying point. He was a captain at the time, and he was leading the squadron of planes someplace over Pennsylvania. And suddenly the V formation of his planes were buzzed by 3 dish-shaped objects. They broke formation naturally, and they regrouped, and the same 3 UFOs came and caused them to scatter again. They regrouped the 3rd time, and they were scattered a 3rd time. And by that time, the commanding officer insisted that they return their planes to the base, which they did. And they were brought into a room, and they were told, they weren't asked, but rather they were told, gentlemen, what you saw was a high flight of Canadian geese. Now, I admire Canada, but this sounded ridiculous. And my roommate was an ex-mathematician. In fact, he was a mathematician. And he whips out his pen, speed, velocity, impossible right angle turn, violating every known law of aerodynamics. And he said to the commanding officer, "Sir, these were not geese, Canadian or otherwise." And he was told, "Johnson, shut up. Don't say another word." And we found out later, within a few minutes, why they were told that these were high-flying Canadian geese. Because in the next room, here you had a bank of reporters, radio and newspaper. TV was not too prevalent that year. So they were questioned by the reporters, and every one of those pilots had to insist, "Gentlemen, ladies, what we saw was a flight of high-flying Canadian geese." Well, I was so impressed with that story that I took my entire summer vacation period to visit every one of these pilots. And you know, every one of their stories checked out perfectly. Not high-flying Canadian geese, but inverted saucer-shaped craft going at incredible speed, some of them changing color as they traveled. Now, that got me started on research that took me to the farthest ends of the earth. And I've been talking with people from every walk of life: pilots, scientists, school teachers, police officers, even some in Scotland Yard when I was visiting England. And I have found out that so many people in high places, they have an idea what these things are, but they're not talking about it. They're not divulging to the public anything concerning the validity of UFOs. Well, let me give you an example of how some military people think. Years ago, while I was at the Pentagon, I asked to see General Whitmire. And the information I'm giving you tonight, most of it will be in the forthcoming full-length motion picture called Stranger at the Pentagon very shortly. I went into this office at the Pentagon. The secretary took one look at me and said, "What do you want?" Well, I thought this was a warm welcome indeed. I said, "I'd like to see the general." She said, "What for?" I said, "Well, I have some personal things I'd like to discuss with him." And she looked at me and she said, "He ain't here." I said, "My God, listen to this woman. He ain't here." I saw his car with the 4 stars on it, out with the banner out in the parking lot. She said, "He ain't here." I said, "What time will he be in tomorrow?" She said, "Around 8 o'clock. Thank you very much." And I walked out. I got there at 7 o'clock before she came in. And I sat there and waited, and she finally came in, and she said to me, "Oh, you again?" I said, "Yeah, me again. What time is the general coming?" She said, "He should be right." And as she spoke, the general walked in, briefcase, cigar in his face, and he looked at me and he said, "You're strange, aren't you?" I said, "No, in the name of strangers, He said, whatever, get into my office. And I did. And there we sat discussing unidentified flying objects. And he blurted out, why can't you be like Dr. Billy Graham, go out there to your church meetings and conventions and preach hellfire and damnation? Why don't you leave UFOs alone? I said, I want to ask you one simple question. I have no desire to enter into a theological discourse with you. And he puffed on his cigar and he said, go ahead, shoot, what's your question? I said, why, sir, is the information regarding UFOs purposely being withheld from the American public? He said, don't you know? I said, no, that's why I'm here. He said, don't you know that the fear of mass hysteria keeps us silent on UFOs? I said, what do you mean fear of mass hysteria? He said, don't you remember what happened in 1938, the famous Orson Welles scare? How many of you remember that? I said, yes, I remember the Orson Welles scare. Some people got scared. He said, some people died. I said, no, they did not die. There's only one case of a man who died, and that's a man who went plunging out of a third-story hotel window in Newark, New Jersey, and the police thought his wife pushed him. I said, sir, that does not hold water. The people of America have a right to know. He said, why are you asking so many questions? I said, I'm here because as an American citizen, I have a right to know. He said, you're curious, aren't you? I said, yes, I'm very curious. And then he said to me, you know what happened to the cat? I said, what cat? He said, the cat wanted to know too many questions. Wanted the answer to too many questions. What did the cat want to know? I said, you're asking me what the cat wanted to know? I'm asking about UFOs and you're talking to me about cats? He said, well, curiosity killed the cat. I said, but what did the cat want to know? And then he said, get out. And I got out. And that was my first and last meeting with General Wiedemeyer. And we're going to put that in the movie, too. We got permission from his family to use his name. It's an amazing thing. Now, before I go any further, how many of you have ever seen an unusual object in the sky? May I see your hands? All right. Gee, over half of the crowd. All right. How many of you have never seen anything unusual? Okay. You know, as small as this crowd is, some of you still didn't raise your hand. How many of you don't give a hoot whether you see them or not? Okay. How many of you would like to see something in the skies? I know I get you to move. Okay. We'll see what we can arrange before the meeting is over. Now let's go on to point number 3. Another possible source of UFOs, they claim, was the former Soviet Union. Well, it's an amazing thing about the Soviet Union. They were saying that UFOs come from the United States. And the United States was saying they're probably coming from the Soviet Union. Well, they were both wrong. Because neither country had developed a spacecraft shaped like a saucer or a cigar or a triangle that could achieve the velocities and the impossible speeds of these things. The Soviet Union to this day has secretly been investigating UFOs since the early 40s. It's an amazing thing. And the investigation behind locked doors is still going on at the Kremlin. Russia has information that they have been sharing. When I say they, I mean the high-ranking generals who are now in retirement are beginning to share their information that they have received regarding unidentified flying objects. And they confess we have nothing that could meet the velocity of these so-called things that are going through the atmosphere at exceeding 20,000 miles per hour, executing impossible right-angle turns, again, violating every known law of aerodynamics. The next point that we have here, that some of these could be coming from Nazi Germany. Now, tomorrow night, which I hope you return to this meeting, I'm going to be embellishing what I know, the information that I have accumulated during my visits to Germany concerning the Nazi projects whereby they have actually built prototypes of saucers, of unidentified flying objects, and they flew them They didn't achieve the supersonic speeds, but they came pretty close to it. And tomorrow night we'll go into that more fully. And the next two, number 5 and 6, possible origins of UFOs are time travelers and interdimensional travelers. There is much controversy concerning these 2 points, time travel and interdimensional travel. There are even some scientists at MIT in Massachusetts and some at UCLA in California, where I come from, that are investigating the possibility of time travel. Several scientists have agreed together after some conferences both in Paris and in Germany that time travel is possible, but not to the future, only to the past, because the future has not yet occurred. So they believe that some of these UFOs could be piloted by time travelers from the past who are catching up with us to find out exactly what we are doing on this planet. The next one that we're going to be going into detail tomorrow night, and I'll be showing you some fantastic pictures, slides from NASA regarding the theory of the hollow earth. There are many who believe that there is life as we know it inside the globe. Tomorrow night I'm going to go into full detail, including quote you some of the scriptures that prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that there is some type of civilization from the hollow earth, and that UFOs have been built on the interior of this planet that are sighted not only by our military but the common people who walk the streets of our major cities. And finally, we have one final possibility of the origin of unidentified flying objects, and that is outer space. Well, if from outer space, where? How about from other planets? In what system? How about our solar system? And how about beyond our solar system? You know, I've studied people all of my life. I hold a degree in psychology. I counsel with police officers and federal officers every week in my office in Chatsworth, California. And I can pretty well tell what a person is thinking and how they adjust themselves to your questions and to your comments and to your statements. And when it comes to this subject of UFOs from outer space, we're forced to ask several questions. And here they are. Number one, how many of you here today believe there is a strong possibility that some UFOs could be coming from outer space? Let's see your hands, please. They could be coming from outer space, okay? We've looked into our skies night and day, and as children, many of us have pondered, is it possible that there's someone walking on some distant planet out there who looks and acts like I do? Maybe they look like us, but they certainly don't act like us. And that's a terrible indictment against the human race. But those from outer space have posed many, many questions, and in some quarters have posed many problems. I was speaking at a convention in Des Moines, Iowa some years ago, and just to give you an idea of how people react when they know you're involved in UFO research and investigation. The convention was over. I was minding my own business, walked into the coffee shop, sat down at the counter. How many of you know how much trouble you can get into minding your own business? It's amazing. And here comes the waitress with a glass of water in her hand. She was halfway across the restaurant. Quite a few people in there. And she hollers out, "Ha, ha, 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 aren't you the flying saucer preacher?" Well, what are you going to say? I said, "Yes." And she said, "Were there any green men in your meeting?" I said, "No, not one showed up." And I'm saying to myself, I wish you'd be quiet. And she put this glass of water right down in front of me, and I looked her straight in the eyeballs, and I said to her, the only thing I said to her, "There are two of us." And her smile vanished, and her lower lip began to quiver. And she examined the empty seat next to me over the counter. I said, "Oh, my wife will be in just a moment." Oh, she said, "My heart." You know they had to send her home in a taxi cab? She was no good for the rest of that week. And when you mention to people, especially those who are not knowledgeable concerning UFO, space, and science, that you may have at one time or another met someone not of this planet, they'll eyeball you, they'll look at you very, very closely, and you can just about imagine how their brain is spinning. Now let me ask you some questions. How many of you here tonight would have a desire, for whatever reason, to meet a person from another world? Let's see your hands, please. All right, just about everyone. All right. If you had such a contact or communication, how many of you would talk about it? 2, 3, 4, 4.5. Okay. How many of you would not talk about it? All right. May I ask why?
Because what people would think at first, hard to tell. Most people,
They think you're crazy.
they think I was nuts. Yeah.
Think you were nuts. All right. But why would the other people here who raised their hand, why would you talk about it? Wouldn't you be afraid of ridicule? You know, I was told before I left the Pentagon, before I left the hotel, the pastor and his assistant came to help me back to the airport, and 2 officers, Air Force Intelligence, knocked at the door, looked like they had the same tailor, and they whipped out their ID and said, Air Force Intelligence, are you Frank Strange? Here we go again, it's Strangers. Dr. Frank Strangers. Okay, Strangers. Yes, I'm Strangers. They said, if you value your reputation, you will not repeat anything of what took place at the Pentagon this past Thursday morning. I said, what took place? They said, you know damn well what took place. And they shook their finger. Both of them shook their finger at me. And when anybody shakes their finger under my nose, I get irate. And that gets my Irish up. And I'm not Irish, I'm Italian. Well, be that as it may, they warned me that I would lose my reputation. Well, by that time, my reputation was so shot it didn't make a particle of difference to me. So I decided to go back to New York at that time and write a book on it. And I wrote the book, My Friend from Beyond Earth. Anybody ever see that book? You still have a copy, don't you? Bless your heart. I decided to write the book. And after that, we wrote Stranger at the Pentagon, which told all about my experience. And then again, the reaction of certain individuals is ironic. My own father, God bless him, he was a preacher, an Italian preacher. And when I came home from Bible college in 1945 and told Dad, I'm studying flying saucers and UFOs and all the rest of it, he said, oh, Mamma mia, I'm going to pray for you. And he did. And years later, when the FBI questioned me at the FBI office in New York about my experience at the Pentagon, they weren't questioning me about the man from space. They were questioning me as to how I got in and out of the Pentagon past 4 security guards without any proper identification. Isn't that amazing? Now, Dad, on the other hand, when I came home and tell him, Dad, I met a man from another planet, a man from the inside of the planet Venus. You know what my dad did? He said, oh, Mamma mia, first you come with the flying sausages. I said, no, Dad, flying saucers, not sausages. And he said, and now you're coming from a man with another word. Oh, we're going to pray for you. And he prayed for me ever since. And he thought I was a little off in telling the story about the stranger at the Pentagon. Well, you know what happened one day? My dad was of the old school. If he wanted to buy bread, he wouldn't go to the supermarket. He went to the bread store, the bakery. If he wanted to buy meat, he went to the meat market. Fruit, went to the fruit store, and so forth and so on. And he had 4 great big bundles. And he was on his way to take the bus home in Glendale, Long Island, where he lived at that time. And a man approached him, and he looked at the man in the face, and he knew that he had seen him someplace before. And the man approached Dad, and he said to Dad, Signor Natale, posso aiutare? Mr. Natalie, can I help you? Can I help you carry your bags? In Italian. Dad says, oh, well, Mommy, sure you can. Here. And he gave him 2 of the bags. And the total stranger said, here, let me take all 4. I can handle them. And he did. And they walked to the bus. They got on the bus. The stranger put the tokens in the slot. And they were sitting side by side on the bus. And the stranger turns to my dad and he said, have you heard from Frank lately? And Dad says, oh, you know Frank, huh? And the stranger said, yes. He says, did you go to school with him? The stranger said, no, not really. And they enjoyed the rest of the ride all the way home. When the bus came to a stop at Dad's corner, they both got off. Stranger got a hold of the 4 packages. They walked toward the house, and here Mom was waiting for them at the door, and she testified later, she looked at this man, she knew she should recognize him, but she couldn't quite place it. And Dad says to Mom, this wonderful, strange man helped me carry the bundles home. We got on the bus, we had a good ride, had a good talk, all about Frank. Oh, really? Yeah. And here he is, and he put the bundles down on top of the living room table, the dining room table, and for some reason he gave them both a nice embrace, a nice hug. And he said, God bless you, I hope to see you again. And he turned to the door, went down the 5 stairs, turned right and started going down the block, and what do you suppose happened in view of Mom and Dad's eyes? What do you suppose happened? He vanished. And right at that point, Mom says to Dad, you should have known who he was. That's Commander Val. And Dad says, me, you should have known. And there they are talking to each other, wondering where in the world this stranger went. They had seen his picture in the book, Stranger at the Pentagon, and they both knew that they should have recognized it. That was the first meeting Mom and Dad had with this alien. As a result, my dad talked the pastor of the church, it was a Pentecostal church, talked the pastor of the church into having me speak on UFOs in the Bible. He had to get permission from the board. I pastored several churches over the years, and I found out by experience, the only thing a board is good for is to sit on. But I won't touch any more of that tonight. I went and I presented all this material at the church, asked them the same questions I asked you tonight. Do you know the response was overwhelming? I have found not only in the churches, but on the college and university circuit that people want to know the truth. I believe the world has a right to know the truth. And when I spoke to the United Nations Security Council some years ago, I told them the world has a right to know the truth. And pretty soon, no power on earth is going to be able to prevent the people from knowing the whole truth. When I was here before, I spoke at a church with Dr. Emerson, and we had the RCMPs sitting on the back row in the church, and the pastor was so frightened his knees were knocking. I said, why are you afraid? He said, well, I never had the RCMP come to my church. I said, well, you should welcome them for Pete's sake. And later on, I got beautiful letters from these 4 gentlemen that they enjoyed the presentation, and they said, you'd be surprised how much the Canadian government has been holding back from the public. I said, well, I believe again, the time is going to come when everybody is going to know the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. I believe it's high time that people understand what is going on in the universe and how it directly affects our lives here on this planet. How many of you agree? Say aye. All right, we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then I'm going to show you some interesting slides. Again, I appreciate all of you who have come tonight. I really appreciate you being here. We'll be back in 10.